My pleasure to welcome Dr. Dave. I think everybody's met him before, haven't you?
We have.
He's a super fisherman. Been posting a lot of pictures of big fish just lately. Which river did you catch those in?
Yeah, well,
You don't have to
I'll say a river in Shropshire, small streams in Shropshire. Yeah, various places actually.
Yeah.
I'm a member of, the sort of clubs, the Game Fishers Club, don't know if there's any members here, the White Swan Piscatorials, the Pheasant Tail Fly Fishers, those sorts of clubs.
I only ask because the rivers have been coloured just at the moment.
They have, and that's going to be a theme of tonight actually.
Yeah, is it? Oh, okay,
Yeah,
super.
yeah.
All right, so over to you, Dave.
Thanks.
Johnny fishes our river as well. Johnny.
That's my river.
Yes, it is.
Thanks very much for inviting me down again. It's been almost a year, just over a year since I was here last, and I think I recognise virtually every face here, so it's nice that you've come back again for some more. So the theme tonight, I'm just going to focus on river flies. If you remember last year I did a few more still water patterns because I do focus on rivers mostly, but a lot of people do ask me to do still water patterns occasionally, so I did do a little diversion last year, but we're going to just concentrate on river flies today. And the theme I thought we would do is just have a look at the trout season, so far, where it's been and where we think it's heading, because I think it's been a really unusual trout season on the rivers this year. It's probably been the worst start to a trout season that I can remember. It's only really got going properly on dry flies in the last 2 weeks. I fish at least once a week. I fish very regularly on a lot of the local rivers around Shropshire and the Welsh borders. It's been incredibly slow, and I've had to come up with a few different methods of fishing to how you would normally want to fish in the early season. So I think the way I've described this season is the good, the bad and the ugly, but in reverse. So right at the start of the season, it was bloody ugly, really. All that rain, the wettest winter period and early spring that has ever been recorded since the 1800s. Which really put a stop to the fishing, and it was desperation really that got me out in the early stages of the trout season. And then it was bad for a while. The rivers were coloured. Some of the rivers are still coloured, but fortunately now we're in a good period. It's really warmed up now. We've got prime temperatures for several different types of fly hatches. Mayflies last night just started properly on my local river. The night before there was a couple, but last night there's what I would call the first flush of mayfly. The fish just completely ignore them. They have no idea what they are at the moment. They probably just look at them and ignore them, but give it a couple of nights and we're going to start to see some good action. So now's a really good time to get onto the rivers for that dry fly sport.
But there's no flies been coming up, has it, Dave? It's very
last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Last couple of weeks.
Yeah. Yellow May died.
There's a lot of yellow mays.
And even on the lakes, they've been totally dead.
Really?
Yeah. My fish go head up with it.
Yeah.
There's not been a fish
Really?
on the top.
Really?
Very cold.
Yeah. So I think we're well and truly into the good part of the season now. We have been in the last couple of weeks. I think we've got all that good ahead of us really. But going back to the very start off with the ugly. The only way I could get any real action on rivers was to use lures and big heavy nymphs. A lot of folks here don't really, or they're not used to using lure patterns, or what the Americans call streamers. But really, at times like it has been at the beginning of this trout season, it's been the only reliable method really to catch any decent trout. So thought I'd start off with the ugly fly, but it was the ugly fly that has actually saved my sanity this season. So I've got a quite a large jig hook in the vise to start off with a 3.5mm tungsten slotted bead. One little detail there, you'll notice that it's slightly tilted forward. There's a slight angle there, and I quite like to do that when I'm tying slotted bead nymphs, just tilt it slightly forward then, it just keeps the bead. Yeah, it makes no difference to the tying of the fly, but it just stops that bead moving up and down. I mean, some people like to use resin, super glue, that sort of stuff, but I like to tie flies quickly and efficiently, and I can't be bothered with that. I can't be bothered with varnishing flies either. I use silk tying thread. This is ultimate tying silk, this particular one from Fish On. But there's power silk, and there's, I think Vivas do one. Semperfli do nano silk, which is all good. This is my favoured one, and it's so strong you never have to use varnish on your flies. That's the first thing I'll say. So just catch the thread or silk onto the shank. Just create an underbody of silk. This bit's quite important for this fly because you want quite a grippy surface on that hook. And the next material is a bit of black marabou, and it doesn't look very good. This is my scrap end box of marabou. So when I'm tying my still water patterns, I always save the scrap ends of these because they're really good for tying smaller flies like cormorants or these river patterns, which I like to use in smaller sizes than on the still waters. So just find a suitable little fluffy end bit. That'll do. When I'm handling marabou, I just like to moisten my fingers slightly. Not too much, but just a little bit, and it just helps you control the fibres a bit better. So it's a case of just pulling, folding, pulling, folding.
Yes.
That's it. Good rule of thumb is just always make sure you're near the hook when you... I'm just trying to get around the right thickness of marabou. That's about right there, so it's not a huge chunk. It's fairly sparse but fairly fluffy. You can see that there. I'll just place that onto the hook. Trim the ends where there's bits of the stalk. And what I like to do at this stage is really moisten down the butt end of the marabou as much as you can, really. So get it nice and damp, and that does a couple of things for you. Firstly, it helps keep all the fluffy fibres down, because when you're trying to attach it with the tying thread, there's nothing worse than having little bits of fibres moving around or folding back on you. And secondly, it helps grip the hook with the thread base much easier, because there's nothing worse with this marabou than tying it on and it just twists around. And then when you're fishing as well, you know the tail just sort of moves around in the, as you're fishing, which is a real pain. So I just pinch and loop that on, gradually increasing tension on the thread so you can get it as tight as you can. And with this tying silk, you can get really tight turns, and if I pull that really hard, it'll be the hook that breaks before the silk breaks. So you can, don't be shy about it. And it just, lengthwise, usually about an inch off the back. I know there's a lot written about stream. There's a lot of stuff on the internet, on YouTube. Over the last couple of years, it's become quite popular in this country, particularly for people who want to catch big trout. And they say that you use a big fly catches big trout, which is fine. But bear in mind, the places we fish around here, places I fish around here, the average size trout is probably 10 to 12 inches. Really, a bigger trout than that is exceptional. Really, you do get them. I mean. You can catch trout 3, 4, 5 pounds, but most trouts are not that size, and I don't find using a really big stream is that effective. You often get plugs and all that sort of thing, but it's not very good at actually catching them. So this is the sort of size that I like. It's visible in the water. It pushes a lot of water around it, creates disturbance, and you tend to get a good hookup rate with that sort of tail. What I also like to do with the tail is just make sure that end isn't too square. The last thing you want to do is go in with your scissors and chop the marabou to give it a square end, as you probably know with still water patterns. I like to just go in there with my fingers and just pinch some fibres out, rough it up really, so it doesn't look as neat from a fly tying perspective, but it gives it a slight bit of taper. It just gives it better movement in the water really. And then the next material I'm going to use is a bit of angel flash, just to give it a bit of sparkle, bit of bling. Just a little bit though. This stuff comes in a nice hank like that, and each one of these hold one in place on one side of the tail, the other on the other side, and then I lock it in with the tying thread. Okay, so you got the two ends on either side, and then I just cut it off to make sure it's no longer than the tail, just perhaps a little bit shorter than the end of the tail, if anything. Doesn't really matter, and it's just a very little, highly mobile. It's so soft, this is, that it pulsates in the water. It doesn't stick out like stiff chunks of mylar, twisted mylar in the water, which so it will move with the marabou. And I put a rib in using some fairly strong gauge wire, silver wire. And the body material, I'm using straggle string, UV straggle string in an olive colour. You can use black. There's a black version of this which is good for this fly. It's a sort of purpley, iridescent. It doesn't really matter because it's going on the underbody, but I quite like that olive. Actually, it goes with the black quite nicely. Trim off the length, tie it in at the end, and then it's a case of just making touching turn wraps all the way up the fly with the straggle string. And tie it in behind the bead. Okay. This is my sort of little secret ingredients on this fly. Most of these streamer patterns or lures, you go for a hen hackle to palm the body, or maybe even a cock hackle. What I prefer to use is a CDC hackle, and you can get this black CDC, black dyed CDC, which I find is perfect for the job. I'm just trying to find the biggest feather I've got in my takeaway curry pot. You want the biggest, longest feather you can find, just to give you the maximum amount of length to palm of the body. I mean, if you're struggling, you could use two separate hackles, but it's quicker and easier if you can find one. So that's a fairly decent. It's not the best quality CDC, by the way. I wouldn't tie dries with this. It's really cheap. It's those bulk packs you can get from, you can get them online or even off eBay. really quite cheap, and I'll use those for this fly. But you really wouldn't want to tie dries with that and expect them to float.
It's a black CDT.
It's a black one, Derek. Yeah. So just tie the thick end of the stalk in behind the bead, trim it off, a couple of turns to lock it in place, and then it's a case of, oh, look, it's come away already. I think the dyeing process makes the stalks of these feathers quite brittle. And this tying thread's a nightmare actually. It cuts through materials like cheese wire. So it gives you that strength, but when you're using softer materials, it can be an absolute nightmare. So it's not the answer to everything, but on balance, I find it the best thing to use. So I'm just going to put a couple of hackle turns in just behind the bead, right behind the bead there, with the longer fibres. And then I'm going to palmer it down the body in fairly wide spaced open turns. So there's 3. If it was a long hook, I'd get four turns in there. But three is absolutely plenty for this size hook, which incidentally, according to the manufacturer of this hook, is a size 14. But it's a bloody big size 14 compared, in most money. And as I keep saying, going on numbers when you talk about hook sizes is so misleading. I could go into my box and I've got probably 3 different regular brands patterns of jig hook that I use for all my tying, and I could pull out a size 14, and the size variation, I should have done that actually on a piece of paper. The size variation's immense really. So I would say this is probably in most hook sizes, what do you reckon? 12, yeah.
So long shank as well.
It's a short shank actually. It's one of those wide gape jig hooks which are fairly short. I quite like those actually as well, particularly in fast rivers, because the wide gape helps with the hook hold. You know, it's so I'm just bringing the rib up in the opposite direction through the hackle. Tie it off behind the bead. I'm putting quite a few strong turns there because this wire is quite strong. Sometimes it's hard to break. There we go. Did better with that than last time, Derek, didn't I? I literally was getting my foot on the hook.
You've been working out, haven't you?
That's right, yeah. So we got this crazy looking fluffy explosion of fibre. But that's the real attraction of this fly, I think. It gives it maximum movement. When that's in the water, it moves fantastically, the marabou tail and that.
It looks like
and that CDC. God knows.
So would you fish that on 2-weight?
You'll break your rod.
Yeah, I mean you can use a 2-weight for pretty much anything on the river, but I tend to use a 3-weight rod for most of it. But I'd fish one of these off the end of a standard 3/4-weight rod. Okay, next.
Do you fish it with other flies or do you fish it singly?
That's a good question. I have been fishing it with 2 flies a lot, particularly when there's been a lot of water and it's been quite coloured. Even on the small streams. First part of the season, typical way I was fishing this is put this on the point, and then another nymph, the nymph I'm going to tie in a minute, on a dropper. So you're effectively fishing it just like a nymph, and I even use a Spanish or a French mono leader, and you can just switch that point fly for a nymph if you want. But I was just fishing off the end with the little nymph on the dropper, and I was, you'll catch most fish in the coloured water conditions. Most fish were taking the streamer, but you were picking fish up on the dropper as well a little bit. So it just gives you best of both worlds. Later on, when things got away from the ugly part into the bad part, where levels were dropping down, still quite coloured, but you had a bit more confidence that you know, you weren't just wanting to chuck a massive dirty streamer around at them. I would sort of switch between the two. So you probably most of the time fish two nymphs, but if you got to a particularly deep stretch of water, or it just felt like it was pushing through a bit, just take the nymph off the point, put one of those on, and it very often pulled a fish when the nymph didn't. It just sort of saved a blank saver, really. You know, in the rivers, you look at it and think it's just no good for fly fishing. It's really a blank saver, so you don't you're not forced to go home or to the pub or something. Forced. Well, my wife's quite savvy now, because I mean she's not interested in fishing at all, but she's seen me use the river level apps all the time, because I'm usually sat in bed. She's reading a book and I'm just there constantly going, you know, oh, it's dropping. So she now knows where to look. So she knows that if I go out and it's at a certain level, she's like, "You didn't fish today, did you? I mean, what? You've been out for how many hours?"
Too much information.
Tricky one, isn't it? I'm going to put a tracker on your phone. Anyway, this can save a marriage because it keeps you in the river, keeps you in the river for longer. Right, so
Don't keep them in bed then.
no.
Someone said fly time was boring.
Right, a bit of dubbing here. This is a purple UV dubbing of the hens variety, number 14. For anyone who's interested, it's just your violet purple, and I just find it goes really nicely with the black colour. Plus, there's a scientific reason for this as well, because this colour is the part of the spectrum that shows up best in dark conditions or in coloured water, because coloured water is effectively dark, you know, it's stopping the light. So this colour's the one that will show up better. The last thing you want to do is use the red end of the spectrum, because it just goes grey. I mean, that's assuming that fish's vision matches the way we see things in the spectrum, but some people, you know, people think that it works, and it certainly gives me confidence. I do like a purple colour in dark water or coloured water, so we'll go with that. So you can put as much as you like. Really, don't be shy with this. It is a big fly after all, so put a good wodge of that dubbing. It's lovely when it actually integrates with the CDC. And then the next bit is optional as well. And that's a perfectly good and effective fly in this context, and probably you know this sort of, it's subtle enough to use in normal water conditions probably. You know, if you're not having any success at all, the fish just aren't taking anything. Even when it's not flooded and muddy, you know, something like this. It's not. I know some clubs don't allow you to, and it's not always what you want to be doing when you're out on the river. And there is an argument that it's better to leave it for another day rather than just desperately catch fish. But particularly if you do competitions as well, and you need to catch a trout, this will often just pull a few fish when everything else has failed. Even in the summertime when it's when it's clear water. I tend to stick to this when I need to, rather than using it all the time. And usually when I need to is when it's coloured. So
Fish downstream.
no, I usually fish this exactly the same way as I would a team of nymphs, upstream, dead drift. Maybe a little bit of movement on it, but certainly no downstream and across. You know, salmon fishing. I mean, you can do, and it probably is effective, but I tend to fish it quite short and just sort of dead drift it like a nymph. When you get a take, you tend to get more positive takes, whereas sometimes downstream the fly either goes up in the water and skims round, or the fish pluck at it and it's it's not as effective. But it depends on the conditions. I mean, there'll be certain pools where you want to fish downstream. You might fish upstream for a bit, or there's a little seam down the edge. You chuck it downstream and just jig it through. So yeah, be flexible really. So I've just put a finishing collar there of Glow Bright number 5 to give it a little bit more colour. Yeah, it's my favourite Glow Bright colour, this number 5. It's what I tend to use if I'm putting.
Yeah, we've got a standing joke because I tie a fly and I use number 5, and everybody said, "We can't get it." I said, "I know, I cornered the market."
No, I'm going completely against what I said earlier about I don't use varnish on my flies. That's if I'm finishing off with a silk, but if you're using anything softer, you need to use varnish because it will just come apart in no time. So I've just put a little bit of this stuff I came across a few years ago, UV varnish. I've had this for years, but it just adds a little bit of something else to it. There we go. It's not unique enough for me to give it a name. When I was a kid, I used to fish almost nothing else but dog nobblers on lakes, yellow dog nobblers specifically. I used to tie all these different flies. This was when I was a teenager. But I used to get to the lake, and it doesn't matter what time of year, where I was fishing. I stood at the side of the lake, and I just always put a yellow dog nobbler on. And I used to catch a lot of fish. I used to win competitions. But everything with a marabou tail to me is a dog nobbler. So that's what I just call it, a river nobbler. So I didn't bring my little display stand today. So I'll just pass this round, and you can just have a good poke around with it.
That Hayes 14, they had trouble with the dolly, didn't they? So you get 3 different packets of Hayes 14. And
Yeah.
they'll all be different colours,
Well,
so you try to get the original all the time.
Yeah, I'll show you this feet.
It's quite good.
I've had 2. You see the
Yeah.
Yeah. So the original was enough. The new one, it's slightly different.
Standardisation, is there?
It's like a Neapolitan ice cream, isn't it?
Yeah. Can you afford those as well?
Oh no, Viennetta for me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, this young man went through the post.
How much?
But it's gone up to 65 if you don't pay on time.
We'll make that a rule, mate.
So the next fly is a nymph that I just discovered this year actually.
Where's the violin?
And it's not one of my original patterns.
Okay, cheers.
I came across this on Fulling Mill's website. They've got quite a good selection of videos on there at the moment, and by their signature tyres. And one of them is Howard Croston, who's the 2 times world champion for England, and the person I regard as the top river competition fly fisher in the UK by quite a margin. Is extremely. If you ever see him on the water fishing, the guy is an absolute genius. You know, he's just, and he's very unconventional in what he does as well. He doesn't just follow what everybody else does. He's very innovative, and he's the same with his fly tying as well. He's got some really innovative patterns. I showed you one last year actually, that cormorant, which has got the tungsten bead, the back end of it, which he calls the kick-back cormorant, for fishing a specific way. That caught my interest, and since last year I've used it on some of my still water, and it's amazingly effective actually. that different kind of movement. Anyway, this is one of his recent Howard Croston. Yeah. This is one of his. I think it's a fairly new one for him actually. This nymph, and it caught my eye. I must admit, some of his patterns don't. A lot of them are just same old. And when it comes to nymphs, I now probably don't use many more than about 3 nymphs all year. I don't really think it makes a lot of difference to the fish. Particularly trout fishing, does with grayling, because you want to be changing colours and sizes to keep. If you're fishing a shoal of grayling, they do get quite fed up with one fly once you caught a few fish. And changing flies and changing varieties of nymphs will keep the grayling coming. But with trout, you tend to be one-shot wonders. You know, they're very territorial, and you don't need to worry too much about the pattern, in my experience. But this one did catch my eye this year, and I've just got a slight variation of Howard's. I'm using a different kind of. He uses I think he uses a straight hook with a jig off bead at the front, whereas I'm using a curved hook. It's a curved fine wire grub hook, and I've just put a standard countersunk tungsten bead at the front of it. I'm using the black thread again. And for the tail, I'm using good old Coq de Lion, and this is one that I came across at the Stafford Fly Fair this year. Absolutely amazing quality Coq de Lion from a chap called Ed Madrigal, and he was selling quite a few products, and people were just snapping them up. There was a bit of a fight going on over one of the snowshoe rabbit feet, which I won. I've got the very last one, but these were flying off the shelf, and managed to grab a packet. It's lovely stuff.
Yes, you are. Reasonable price as well.
It was. I mean, this is no more expensive than the usual stuff, but you know, it's like when you've seen the good stuff like this, you really appreciate. I'm going to say how bad the doors. Let's be positive.
How easy you've been conned before.
I mean, does it really make a huge difference for nymph tails? For dry flies, this is an absolute delight. So just pick off a small bunch there. Little technique with Coq de Lion. I like again to use moistened fingers when I've taken off the stalk, that's just like with the marabou. And one of the easy ways to get those end bits all lined up really nicely. There's nothing more frustrating than you're pulling it off and you trim it off and you get it in your finger and thumb and it's all uneven, and you get so fed up with it that you just bung it on the hook and tie your fly. Is if you pull it off the stalk as opposed to cutting it. And I don't know if this is something I've discovered that everyone else knows. Rather than using your scissors to cut off the stalk, which is a bit hit and miss, just use your fingers, pull it away from the stalk, and then just snap it off.
You'll know that, Dave.
Yeah, well.
There's a variation on that.
I'll go.
Which you pull the feather and not.
Pull the feather. Yeah, that's it.
That's upsetting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a bit behind the. I'm not being in the Fly Dressers Guild. I'm probably.
You taught us that.
Yeah, I'm learning.
When are you coming back again, David?
I don't know.
Your second lesson?
Okay, I won't do any talking. I'll just tie the fly in, so you know what I'm doing. All right, important stuff now. So the rib I'm using was a bit of a surprise for me actually. Chartreuse fluorescent thread. You could use Glow Bright number 9 if you want. But this one I quite like is Semperflee's version of Glow Bright, because it's an abraded cord. So for ribs, it just gives that rounded texture. And what I would normally do, and I'm just cutting that off there, what I normally do before using this is pre-treat it with this this varnish. So I usually have a big, if I'm going to tie a batch of these, take a big strand and I'll just paint it with that varnish, and then leave it overnight or for a few hours, hanging over the vise to let it dry. And that does two things. One, it gives it a pretty waterproof coating, so it means that won't get waterlogged and potentially lose its colour when it's in the water. And secondly, I think the UV in this varnish just gives it a little bit extra, gives it a bit of extra shine. But I do find that, like with the streamer pattern, a bit of UV and a bit of a more bling than normal, I think does work when you've got really coloured water conditions. Probably wouldn't use this in clear. It's probably a little bit over the top in sort of clear water. But when you've got a real muddy river, and some of the rivers around here, they get really muddy. It just helps the visibility.
Some of these young girls use this UV nail varnish.
Yeah.
It glows up in the discos.
Yeah. My wife does as well, and I often nick
That's
it.
why the nail varnish just...
Yeah, she's got on those UV. When they put those resin.
Yeah.
It's basically using, they put the same stuff that we use on their nails. She's got this thing she puts her hand in, and then so I sometimes get in trouble because I tie a whole batch of buzzers or something, and I just line them all up, stick them in there. She's like, what's in there?
We're learning more about your family life, Dave.
I know.
I'm worried.
Right, so we've gone from a very unconventional material, a bright blingy rib, to pheasant tail. Tried and trusted pheasant tail, sort of harking back to the pheasant tail nymph that really is the only thing we really need to use. So pull about 6 to 8 fibres off is ideal for this size hook. Moisten it slightly just so it's not brittle anymore. Touching turns all the way up to the bead. And then turning in the opposite direction with the rib. Just provide some quite wide open turns. All the way up to the bead. When it's on the fly with that pheasant tail, it doesn't look so horrific actually. It gives a really nice, strong ribbed appearance, which is not unlike the nymphs in the water. The rib is quite a prominent feature and probably quite a trigger feature for the trout. I'm going to use a piece of orange holographic tinsel.
Any particular reason for choosing it?
I quite like this curved hook, just for its effectiveness really when of hooking and holding fish. Yeah. Ludlow Club had a chap, a friend of mine called Lewis Hendry, did a series of Zoom ones, and Lewis is he says it himself. He's on the OCD scale, rather the sort of far end of it. So he looks, the detail he goes into is amazing, and he was told us this really interesting thing about hooks, and he used to use jig hooks just like we all do for nymphs, but he finds now that particularly when you're using dropper flies, using normal curved hooks or the dry fly type profile straight hook with the inward pointing just helps hold fish much better when you fish it on a dropper. And so I started going down that line, and I think he's probably true. So that's why I've chosen this curved hook, because I fish this fly predominantly on a dropper and not as a point fly. So the holographic tinsel forms the thorax for this fly. So we'll just tie it in behind the bead, and then I'm just going to create a small thorax of tinsel, and I'm going to put several layers. I'm just going to sort of layer it up a bit to give it that slightly fatter thorax. Just be careful it doesn't fall over the place. If it does, just come back and tie it off behind the bead. And again, it looks like some sort of crazy buzzer impression really, and quite blingy with that thorax. And I must admit, when I first saw this fly, I was a little bit put off by how blingy it did look actually. But when it's finished, when it's in the water, it actually looks quite acceptable. And again, as an early season pattern, when the water's quite coloured, it probably is an advantage. So the final material for this fly is CDC hackle, CDC collar. So just select a natural CDC here. Find yourself a nice fluffy one. It's always good. There's two ways you can tie CDC, and the standard way, which everybody uses and all the professionals use, is to tighten by the tip. So create your V, hold the tip of the plume, and then just pull the fibres back, and that forms your locking in point. But another technique I learned actually from this chap Lewis Hendry in his Ludlow fly tying presentation was to do it the other way. So cut off the tip about 1 centimetre, 1.5 centimetres, and then tie it in by the thick end of the stalk. And then using your hackle pliers, you then grab the plume tip of that. Just make sure you trim off any couple of turns. Once it's in place, really locks it in and stops it slipping out. So you're really looking at putting just one complete turn, just about one complete turn of that. So it's not really a hackle, it's just provides a bit of movement. With these CDC hackle nymphs, I don't like to have too much of a too thick a hackle, because it just when it gets wet, it looks like a chunk of weed on the hook. And I don't know, it might make a difference or not. I quite like just a sort of quite sparse one, just to give it a bit of movement. And Lewis's method of doing it helps you achieve that easier. But if you tie it in the normal way, I find you can't help yourself but put 2 turns in, and you tend to come out with a very thick collared pattern. So that's why we're breaking the rules there. And it's really nice, these zoom fly tying things with that Derek puts on, because the sorts of little tips you get from these guys that you never see it in a magazine article, you never see it anywhere else, but they're willing to share it on these, you know, on Zoom.
Picking stuff up even now.
And these are things that they keep to themselves most of the time. And I hope I'm doing the same tonight, but
Your family life is really interesting.
yeah, absolutely. wait till you hear about my brother. I'll get on to him later.
Part 2.
Oh dear, completely lost where I am now. What I've just done then is I've put quite a few turns of the black thread in just behind the bead to actually give it a bit of a feature. So you've got this sort of thorax, which you can see, you'll see it better when you hold it closer. There's that little bit of orange holographic to give it a bit of sparkle, and then I've just put in a few turns of that black thread to give it that contrast. And this really effectively suggests the large dark olive nymph, which are really active first part of the trout season. And they tend to be quite large as well. I mean, that is a size, I should have said it's a size 12 curved hook. Put a 3mm bead in it. And some of these nymphs, you know, at the start of the trout season, they're quite large because they're ready to hatch. And they do have quite dark thoraxes when they're about to hatch, and the blood starts to pump into the wing cases just before they hatch. They tend to go quite a dark colour. So it just represents that, and it gives a little bit of contrast. So that's my version of Harry Croston's, what he calls the Batis nymph. And it has worked really effectively this season for me, so it's probably a lot of flies I try and they're okay, but no better than anything else. They just go into one of my boxes that I get stacked up. Probably ought to sell them on eBay, but they're just there. This has gone into my working box, you know, which has got a small selection of flies, probably about 2 nymph patterns that I'll just use most of the time, and very rarely need to go into the other box. Okay. So we've done the ugly, we've done the bad. We'll move on to the bad stroke good. We will certainly go for the dry flies now, and we're going to concentrate on those because that's what's working at the moment. So, what am I doing? Same hook. Put the tungsten away. We won't need that anymore. And a method that I think probably is very popular with people is highly effective on streams, on smaller rivers and streams. Very popular is the duo, which is the dry fly on a dropper and a nymph below it. So I'll tie a dry fly pattern which I use most extensively for fishing this particular method. Got a size 12 curved hook, the same hook actually that I used for that nymph. I've just put some orange coloured silk. And I'm just going to create a parachute post using a mixture of bright orange and bright pink floating yarn.
Any reason why you tied a mixture of orange and pink?
It's purely just for visibility and different light conditions. I used to use just orange, it was preference. I find orange is not too unnatural looking to a fish because a lot of hatching insects have a sort of orange colour. But I've sort of found recently that adding a bit of pink in there just gives a bit of extra visibility, particularly on the smaller streams when you're fishing between sort of light and shade all the time. You know, you've got foam, sections of white foam on the water. You're fishing under trees 1 minute, and then the next minute you're fishing in open water. It just stands out a little bit more. So what I'm doing here is I'm just taking this is quite a thick strand, and I don't want to use all that. I don't want a massive thick post. You know, I'm not tying those so-called clink hammer indicator flies here. This is a genuine dry fly that will catch fish and is fished to bring fish up. You know, I'm not interested in fishing bungs or indicators. This is whatever I put on my line, it has to be a fish there as a fish catcher, and the duo for me is more about the dry fly than the nymph. Otherwise you may as well just go float fishing. So it's trying to achieve that balance between visibility to allow you to fish the nymph effectively, and being natural enough that a fish will take it just as readily as a normal dry fly. So this is the way I like to tie the posts on these types of flies, like clink hammers and parachute flies. I've put the yarn in, tied it in there with just two equal lengths, and then what I do is I'll bring those together, hold it up, and then just make a series of turns, holding it very firmly and pulling quite strongly. And then once it's in place, you can then put in quite a few turns of thread around the base of it, and what that does, it helps lock it in position so it won't move whatever you do to it, and it won't fall off when you're fishing. But it also creates a nice sort of stalk there for when you're working with your hackle. It helps create a nice base for the hackle to be wound in a neat way. So just leave that there for now. We're not going to do anything with that. And then for the body of this fly, I'm going to use a dubbing material. You can use whatever your favourite dubbing is for this. What I've done here, my latest favourite sort of dubbing here is a blend that I've made myself of squirrel, just natural squirrel dubbing, and then I've put a little bit of UV synthetic in as well. So this one here next to the purple is hairline UV ice dubbing brown colour, which is really popular one. It's the dubbing that they tie the Duracell jig with. If you're familiar with that pattern, it's a popular graining pattern. So what I do is I just take a bit of that, and then I just chop it up into small bits and mix it in with the dubbing. I don't want long bits because I want it to be all straggly. Just want tiny little specks of sparkle. Okay, so just dub that body. there's no rib on this fly because again I can use the advantage of the silk and just use the silk as a rib to reinforce it, but not add any extra weight. So you can go back down the body and then back up again in nice open turns to form a rib. And I'm going to use a grizzle hackle. Just try and find a suitably sized one. That'll do. Now with these style of flies, I like to tie my hackles in upside down. Some people like to do it the other way. I just find you get better floatability by tying it in upside down and winding it upside down as well. So it's a case of just forming a parachute and then pulling the yarn backwards and forwards when you go round just helps each successive turn lay underneath the next one, so you get these nice layers. When I'm tying a dry fly like this for fishing the duo with a nymph, I like to use a lot of hackle. I do find it helps the fly float quite a lot, and if you don't use quite as much hackle, it's the one thing that causes the fly to sink much easier, quicker. And the last thing you want is to be fishing, and for every other cast, the fly just sort of go down and start sinking all over the place. So that's a bit of a compromise, because having too much of a hackle probably makes it a bit less naturally attractive to a fish wanting to eat it. But in terms of functionality, it's a really good compromise, I think, for fishing this way. And I do catch a lot of fish on the dry fly on this method.
Fishing it as a duo rather than singly.
You can fish. It's a really effective single fly to use, actually.
Yeah,
sorry. What I do, I probably tie it in a smaller size with a bit less hackle.
But when you've got a nymph on it, it looks more like an emerger because the nymph's pulling it down.
Yeah, true.
Below the water surface.
Yeah.
So it is kind of an emerger.
Yeah.
Rather than the dry.
Yes, that's a good point.
And if you're tying the hackle with the dull side upwards, then it will sink lower into the water.
Yeah. So what I do now is I just pull everything up and then just put 2 turns just underneath that to kind of exaggerate that a bit more, just to pull everything up and just keep all those fibres, because you really want them to float as much as possible when that's in the water. So I mean, that's a perfectly acceptable fly, and that's one of the version I use quite a lot. But there's a little extra thing that I do use sometimes, which does help this fly's buoyancy, but I think it also helps its attractiveness as well when it's as a fish catching fly. So I'm going to use a CDC feather, and a bit like with the streamer, I want to choose one that's one of the biggest ones I can find in my box. And I'm just going to use this as a second hackle. So I'm going to prepare that for the split wing using the Petit Jean tool, or the You can use a bulldog clip for this just as well. And just split that threads between two fingers. Oh, split that a bit too much. Just about to say that this silk is excellent for this technique because it splits really nicely, and then every time I do a demo it gives me trouble. So it's just a little bit of CDC there. Just twist that in. And I'm just going to tie that in underneath the grizzle hackle. And then up to the heads, you can tie that off. I find using this method a bit easier than a whip finish tool for this style of flies, because it means you can get under the hackle as opposed to having to worry about going over it and upsetting the hackle. And trim off the post. As a rule of thumb with a post, I tend to measure it against the hackle and cut it exactly the same distance above as the hackle is, as the radius of the hackle. It's very tempting when you're fishing crane flies for the duo and you want something that gives a bit of indication, is to make that much bigger. But what you do find, I don't know if anyone else has, it tends to topple over on the water. So you don't want it too long. You want it to sit on the water perfectly every single time in the right position. So don't be tempted to make that post any longer than the radius of that hackle, and it'll sit perfectly, and you'll get great visibility on the water with that from above. But when you look at it from underneath, it's quite a natural looking fly. The fish won't see that, it won't put them off, and they take this fly really readily. You know, if they're looking up, you know, it genuinely gives you the best of both worlds. Either it gives you the choice of the nymph downstairs or this on top. And what I found recently, in the last week or so, when I have been fishing this duo method, I've been getting more takes to the dry fly. And what I do at that point is I tend to just take the nymphs off and just concentrate on dry fly fishing, which I have done in the last couple of weeks. But I had one interesting evening when there was not a lot of surface activity, so I was fishing this and a little nymph, picking fish up on the nymph mostly, and it was one of the first rising fish I saw of the season. So I got all excited, and I didn't want to just re-rig everything, because I saw this fish rise. I thought, how long is it going to be there? You know, I didn't want to sort of take all this off, so I just cut the nymph off, and in my haste I just kept that on the dropper, and I put an accurate cast over this fish, so it was still in the dropper, but there was just nothing on the other end. Fish just took it straight away and I landed it. So you can do that when you, and I think this is the sort of competition techniques that come through. You can fish a duo rig and then just trim the nymph off and just fish the dry, even though you've got bits of mono flying around. It doesn't put the fish off, and if you're an accurate caster, you can do that. So it's quite versatile, really. And that CDC underneath just gives a little bit of extra movement and softens the profile, and it does help it sit on the water a bit better.
Would you like to have a break? popping out for a few minutes, have a drink?
Yeah, I've totally lost track of time. 20 to 9.
We didn't join the Museum because we contacted them, didn't get any info, and then suddenly out of the blue, we get this email, and by then we joined other clubs. Shame really, but it seems like Ben lost interest.
I think he has, yeah.
And we couldn't, the access was difficult. We offered to make access to stream, but no one came back.
No.
But there you go, shame.
Yeah, I'm surprised the Game Fishers Club haven't approached him.
Yeah.
I'm open to.
So are you in the marches? You're in the marches fishing?
There's a bank holiday.
Okay. Derek told me about that.
Oh, you can.
But I was on to Tenbury angling.
Yeah.
AGM last Friday, and they said they're negotiating with the marches. Where their water, which water they got. But I mean, most of it's taken up, the honest taken up,
John
and taken up by
It's pretty much
Which has got a
which is awkward.
yeah. I'll be interested to find out.
yeah, well, I'm going to do course like this.
Yeah.
Yes.
As if I still watch.
What other clubs are you a member of?
Galway, that's on the mono.
Oh yeah.
That's good for us.
Yeah.
Good, nice fishing. Really nice.
Yeah.
So I
I did.
grow into fond.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen.
Tenbury,
When you come, pay £2
Merthyr Tydfil, Prince Albert.
Good Saturday.
So, I always used to fish Merthyr Tydfil, but I don't do that so much these days. It used to be really good fishing in the river
Is that the Taff and the Usk, isn't it? It's the Taff and the Usk, isn't it?
Yes, they've got a lot of the Taff, and then they own 3 stretches. They actually bought the water. They've got 3 stretches, which is salmon fishing water as well, around Abergavenny. That's quite nice.
Yeah.
But I always feel a bit vulnerable when I park on the turf. Yeah.
They get some big fish out there.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So, did you come across Sean Robbins
After 9 o'clock.
at all?
Yes, I do know Sean. Yeah. His crew.
He's no longer captain of the Welsh team, did you know?
That's the only. But you can't hold in.
I didn't know. I thought he always was captain of the Welsh team.
Yeah, I think there's been a fallout.
If you're like me,
Some
I don't get any
Sean used to live in Hereford.
if I get up and that.
Oh right, yeah.
A friend of Pete's.
Yeah.
Moved to fishes. Because it got 3 stretches.
Sorry, I have to.
Okay, nice to see you.
To see you, nice. Right. Dave, thank you very much. I'll be seeing the rest on the video. Okay, cheers.
Cheers then.
Yeah, so he's got a a stretch above here now. No, that's he's got that as well.
Yeah.
And he's got a stretch by Newbridge. He's got 3 basically, yeah. It's nice.
I mean, it's almost every day they're posting pictures of big fish, isn't it? It's like one after the other.
Yeah. He's keen, super keen.
Yeah. I've met him a couple of times on the river. He's Carl Cheshire, the younger chap who's been the Welsh Rivers champ a couple of times. Fishes with Shaw quite a lot.
So, the honest about the only fish we still got to have first. This happens.
She's the eldest one.
And that's, funny enough, that used to be better, even though it's not folks. That used to be better than the syndicate stretch.
Sometimes I do, to be honest with you. I mean, it still can be very, very productive.
Probably gets poached.
It does get poached a lot, and I was really worried, but I've had some good fish out of it this last 12 months. So it doesn't seem to be badly affected. There's not as many big grade. There's not as many of those bigger fish which... there's plenty of fish there. Summer's evening you get some horizons. Whereas on syndicate water it can be a bit dead.
I've noticed there's been some really good days, but few and far between.
I really debated about whether to join the syndicate this year, and I was going to say no. And then just sort of that, I messaged Ollie and said, is anything happening this year? He said, I'll get the details out next week. Literally 2 days later, he sent out details.
I didn't get any.
Really? He sent some letters out a couple of weeks ago. And I just thought, oh, go on, I'll carry on.
The fishing was good. If you come down from the car park, there's a couple of nice bends, easy access, and then there's the place where you wade over and ford. But below that, there is good fishing, but it's just so overgrown.
When you got 3 hours for free,
you can get down in the winter. In the summer, it's not a question of getting down, it's a question of knowing where there's a drive or not. Unless you cut it down, you just don't know. And that limits then the amount of fishing.
It's certainly not been as productive as it used to be for me.
No. And have you fished the Ledwidge?
Yes, I've been fishing that a fair bit recently actually. I did quite well a couple of weeks ago on there. It's not fished very often. I think the White Swans stretch at Canaan seems to get a lot of attention. I was going to fish that on Saturday, and that bugger Ivor Simpson was already there. His car seems to be parked there the whole time whenever I try and. So I've not been on that stretch, but game fishers have got the tilt stretch.
Is that on the Canaan Road? Is that right?
Yeah. So it's where there's the bridge.
Yeah.
The cross looks like a T-junction.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people park here to go
Every time I've been there, his car,
Right.
his blue Ford has been parked. But I know he's
early season, isn't it? It's good electronic.
Well, I can imagine it just gets too overgrown. I think as it gets much later in the season, it's becoming so inaccessible. I fished it 2 weeks ago on the game fishers stretch at the Till, which is just below the White Swan section. And at first it was really difficult. It was big muddy banks, like going into the Grand Canyon. But I found halfway up the stretch it all changed, and I started catching fish. I had 24 trout. And some of them were, you know, they were up to about 14 inches. It was the biggest one.
Lots of trees.
Lots and lots of trees. And access was horrendous to things. A lot of barbed wire fences and literally skidding down the bank into the water. But the bits I did get to, it was either sections of just really shallow water with just nothing there, and then pockets stuffed with fish. It was very enjoyable actually. Yeah. It was that.
Okay, yeah. I fished that. That was something very similar.
This was really effective. They were taking I probably had 50-50 on the nymph, and then some of them are rising for this fly.
Yeah, I fished that quite a lot. I gave some to a guy one day. And I made the comment earlier on an emergency because he said he fished this at dry and didn't catch anything. And he put an nymph on.
Just pulled it down.
He was catching fish. But it was a totally different
I think you're right. Yeah, it's a good point actually.
So I put. I use flexi floss because it's a lot thinner, finer.
Last time I
looked, so it's still got the parachute. The body goes. It just helps it.
It's still been raining a bit though, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll perhaps do
But it's not
a couple more patterns. We've got time, so we'll be done and out by 9:30.
Okay, alright, okay, thank you. Dave's going to do 2 more flights.
Oh, we did have a couple of thunderstorms in different places.
I thought we lived in the same country, wouldn't it? Well, only 200 miles away in Essex, and then it's off the rain.
I was at the allotment the other day when we had a thunderstorm there. Some of the town is very running over.
I made a start on mine a couple of weeks ago. Probably now I've got big clods and I've got breaking down, and they're going to be like stones now.
I still remember that, so
I'll win.
You'll have to go and no dig for you.
Oh, what's that?
Right,
Compost and carpet.
I'll perhaps tie a couple more flies, two dry flies to finish off. These are the 2 flies that have been most effective this last week or so, and I think they're probably going to carry on and be good flies throughout the season as well. So I thought I'll share these with you. And they're fairly new patterns as well. So I've just got a fine wire dry fly barbless hook on. This is a size 14. This one. It's the orange tying silk for this fly. So I'll just put a bait of silk on the hook there, and then I'm going to go back to the dubbing that I talked about earlier, which is the squirrel with sort of homemade mix of UV in there as well. You notice that I'm actually starting from the near the eye of the hook with this dubbing, which is not the usual way to do it. Normally we work from the back to the front. But this is the method I'm using is one that Bob Wyatt's used quite a lot, which is using the silk as the rib of the fly. So the most efficient way of doing that is to dub it from the top to the bottom, basically. So you put the dubbing in, touching turns down the fly, and then once you put the dubbing in, the dubbing runs out. You've then got a rib, so that means you can then go back up the fly, and it's an instant lightweight, very strong rib. A touch of orange, which gives that sort of quite nice natural appearance. This is a very simple fly, dare I say. This is straight out of the Bob Wyatt's book, which is one that I really do subscribe to when it comes to the flies that I use for fishing. I do enjoy tying all sorts of flies, but the ones I tend to have most success with are the really simple but really functional flies. So this is one, and that's, you know, Bob Wyatt. He's written a couple of books and featured quite a lot in various magazines, I think, over the years. And he ties these wonderfully simple flies that, but they're deceptively hard to get right. To get them truly effective, there's lots of little subtle techniques and proportions of materials and that sort of thing. So this is a variation of one of his signature patterns, which is what he calls the deer hair sedge, but I'm calling this the elk hair caddis, or the elk hair, no, sorry, the elk hair dry, because it's not just it's not a caddis, although it superficially looks like a caddis. So I'm using elk hair rather than deer hair. The reason I do that is it just gives a little bit more buoyancy, and it's a little bit more robust, and I don't think it makes much difference in terms of the fly's profile. And I'm just going to take a fairly small pinch of elk hair. I'm tying a fairly small dry fly here, not a great big sedge type pattern.
Is that a coarser hair?
Sorry?
Is that a coarser hair than,
this is quite...
than the deer hair?
Yeah, it's slightly thicker than the deer hair.
Yeah.
The elk is. It's a bit, the fibres are a bit thicker. Yeah. So I'll put that into the hair stacker just to give it a neat appearance by lining up the stalks. There we go. Just flick off the any stray bits of hair and that underbody. You get quite a lot of underbody fur with elk. It is best to get rid of most of that, really, to tie a nice neat fly. And I'm just going to tie that in. I'm not going to make this wing too long. I don't want it to stick out too far at the back here, because as I say, I'm not trying to just represents a sedge or a caddisfly. With this one, this is a very general dry fly that works equally well when olives are hatching as well as when sedges. It's a really useful dry to have in your box, and it's invariably effective, I find, on hungry trout this time of year on small streams. So I've trimmed that off to leave just a little bit of a the stalks at the front there. So Bob Wyatt's original pattern is effectively just that. It's just a body of I think he uses just hair dubbing, quite spiky, with the deer hair over the top, just lashed on with a few stalks at the front, and that's it. It's really effective, simple sedge pattern. I'm just going to add a little bit of something else to this fly though. Just cut off any fibres that you just don't want and don't need. So a slight variation on Wyatt's original pattern. I'm just going to use some really spiky squirrel, grey squirrel. I'm being quite generous there with these squirrel fibres, and I've gone for the really spiky ones. So it gives a lot of spiky movement at the front of the fly without having to use a hackle. Again, because there's quite a lot of stuff sticking out at the front, it's better to use one of these methods to do the whipping rather than trying to get a whip finish tool over there. You just end up getting it all clogged up with the squirrel hair. So now you notice I put quite a thick, generous amount of squirrel on there. So what that means, I've got plenty to work with, but I'm just going to thin it down a bit by picking bits out, so you then get quite a lot of leggy movements, but without it going too bold. That's it. So if I turn it upside down to see, that's the profile that you'll see, trout will see on the water. It's not as bulky as a sort of traditional sedge pattern, but it does work really well when a lot of different types of insects are hatching, particularly this size 14. I used this last night on a local stream. After dinner I went out, and it was a really nice hot evening, and went out about 7 o'clock and fished until it was dark, and this is the only fly I used. And there were different flies hatching. Look, the fish were eating a lot of small stuff, and they were taking also olive uprights that were hatching and coming on the water. So there was a mixture of little stuff, and this just did the trick. Virtually every fish I covered took it, and I had one really decent sized trout last night as well, and probably about 20 others to be honest with you in 2 hours from this little tiny stream. So it's a really useful fly to have in your box. It does tend to work quite effectively. So I call this just the elk hair dry. It just is a very, very, very general fly pattern.